He laughed so hard at the sound of my old radio voice he snorted beer through his nose. Clark had come by for lunch, his monthly act of sonly obligation, and I had made the mistake of pulling out one of my old broadcast tapes. It was a reel from 1984 during the final stretch of the Lionel Shore show, back when Portland still had grit on the airwaves and I still wore jackets that creaked when I leaned into the mic. "Jesus, Dad," he coughed, wiping his face. "You sound like a used car commercial trying to seduce a librarian." He meant it as a joke, but the bite came through like static under a ballad. He always did that, laughed at things that meant something to me. Shrugged off parts of my past as if they were garage sale leftovers. "Different time," I muttered, ejecting the tape. My hands fumbled slightly. The arthritis had started playing piano on my knuckles. Clark leaned back, scanning the shelves around my modest living room, each one packed with tapes, photos, old microphones that hadn't buzzed in decades. "You really hung on to all this crap." I didn't answer. I just wrapped the tape in its faded sleeve and slid it into the labeled slot. Shore, 1984, Rainy Days and Lost Requests. He never asked why I kept it all, why I hadn't thrown it out after my last broadcast, or even after Beverly died, when everything else seemed up for discarding. But that show was the last time I felt heard, not just tolerated. Back then I had a voice that could land softly or cut glass. People tuned in not just for the music, but for the way I told stories around it. Naomi King, my last producer, once said I could make the weather sound like Shakespeare. Clark didn't grow up with that version of me. He grew up with the man who forgot field trips, who fell asleep during his middle school piano recital, who once missed his birthday entirely because I got stuck hosting a vinyl tribute to Sam Cooke. "Anyway," he said, standing, "don't dwell. You had your run." He kissed the top of my head absently, already halfway to the door. "I gotta beat traffic," I nodded. "Drive safe." He didn't look back. The house went quiet in the way only houses with one occupant can. I sat back down, let the afternoon stretch like taffy around me, the reel-to-reel still whirred slightly, its wheels slowing to a halt. I reached for another tape. This one was marked Marty Gold, call-in segment. I smiled. Marty had been a regular, calling in every Thursday at 9:17 p.m. sharp, right after the Sinatra set. He always requested the same thing, Summer Wind, and then talked about the one girl who danced to it with him in 1966. I pressed play. "And if she's still out there," my voice rasped through the speakers, "Marty hopes she's listening. He's still got the second button she popped off his shirt." I chuckled. That's when I heard it, faint but unmistakable, a crackle over the speaker, followed by a voice that wasn't mine. "Lionel Shore, if you're out there, we still remember. Some of us still listen." The reel cut out. Static followed. I stared at the player, heart thumping. It wasn't part of the original recording. That voice. It had a trace of FM interference like it had come through live. The hair on my arms rose. I rewound, played it again. Same message, same voice. Some of us still listen. It was impossible, but somehow, someone had found my frequency. I didn't sleep that night. The tape ran again and again, the final seconds echoing in my head like an unresolved chord. Some of us still listen. It wasn't a prank. I would have known. I've lived long enough with the weight of broadcast fidelity to hear when something doesn't belong. The voice had edge, warmth, the particular hush of analog breath. I sat with it until dawn. Not just the tape, but the feeling, the ache of a door, long shut, creaking open. By morning, I needed to know if it had happened by chance, a fluke in the recording, or something more. I pulled out my boxes, dozens of reels neatly labeled like a cartographer's archive. I chose 5 random nights from across a decade and played them straight through. Nothing. Until the 6th tape. June 3rd, 1987. I had just finished a tribute set to Etta James. At the tail end of the reel, just after my sign-off and a second of silence, it came again. "Lionel, it's been too long. Still here. Still tuned in." My heart thudded once, then hard, again. The voice this time was clearer, not recorded in the past, but somehow threaded into it. The only person I could think to call was Naomi King. I hadn't spoken to her in over 20 years. Last I heard, she'd left Portland for L.A., worked with a few public stations, then disappeared into the whirl of modern streaming. But when I dialed the number from the yellowed Rolodex card still tacked to my fridge, she answered on the second ring. Naomi King. I froze. "It's Lionel," I said, quieter than I meant. "Lionel Shore." There was a pause, long but not unfriendly. "Well, damn," she said, a smile wrapping around the words. "I was just telling someone about your Moonlight Jazz Hour." We talked. Not about the tapes, not at first, about time, about people who left, people who stayed, about how the city had changed, but still smelled like wet cement after rain. Then I told her. She didn't laugh. She didn't call it nonsense. "You know," she said slowly, "Marty Gold reached out to me last year, asked if I had any old recordings of your show. Said he was trying to get something off the ground, a tribute series or something." My breath caught. He never told me. "Well," she said, "maybe he wanted to surprise you." I hung up with a promise. She'd look into it, call me back. I didn't wait. I took the bus across town to the last address I had for Marty Gold, a 2-story walk-up near Mount Tabor, sandwiched between a shuttered bakery and a vape shop. I buzzed his unit. No answer. Then I heard it. Through an open window on the second floor, the unmistakable warble of my own voice, half buried in static, playing from what sounded like an old stereo. I shouted his name, a curtain moved, and then slowly the window opened. Marty leaned out. Older than I remembered, beard gone gray, but still him. "Well," he said, grinning, "took you long enough." I stared up at him, the spring wind tugging at my coat. "You've been broadcasting," I said. He nodded. "Not exactly. Come up. I'll show you." I climbed the stairs, each one slower than I wanted to admit. At the top, he waited with the door open, a reel deck glowing on the kitchen counter. "You weren't the only one who missed that voice, Lionel." I stepped inside, and for the first time in decades I felt like I was walking into a studio. Marty's apartment was a shrine to the analog past. Reel decks on wooden shelves, a ribbon mic mounted to a boom arm near the window, crates of vinyl stacked too high. The walls bore posters from old jazz nights, curling slightly at the corners. "It's not a station," he said, gesturing around, "but it gets out." I raised an eyebrow. "Gets out where?" "Shortwave," he said. "Pirate frequency. Sven at night. Limited range, but clear enough when the weather's dry. I call it the Echo Room." He moved to the tape deck, adjusted a dial. My own voice filled the room again. Not a recording this time, but a live rebroadcast from one of my archived shows. "I've been airing your tapes since January, quietly. Just a couple of nights a week. I don't advertise it, but people find it." I sat down at his kitchen table, stunned. "You pulled this off, alone?" "Naomi helped me digitize them. I cleaned them up, spliced in a few transitions, started slipping in messages to see if you'd notice." He grinned. "Didn't think it'd take 5 months. I didn't know whether to hug him or throttle him." "You could have just called," I said. "I could have," he agreed. "But I wanted you to hear it first. Not through words, through air." I looked around again, the whole room a broadcast in waiting, my breath caught in my throat. "It's strange," I said quietly, "how something I buried still sounds alive." Marty leaned back, his chair creaking. "Because it is alive, Lionel. Your voice, the way you held a room, it never went anywhere. It just needed the right signal." We sat in silence for a while, the broadcast humming in the background. Billie Holiday faded into Ray Charles, then static. "Would you—" Marty started, then hesitated. "Would you consider doing a new one? Just a single show, something real. Your voice now, not just the archive." The thought gripped me. Terrifying. Tempting. "People don't care about my kind of radio anymore," I said. "They do," he said. "They just forgot how to ask for it." I didn't answer, but something had cracked open. I left Marty's apartment with a USB drive full of cleaned recordings and a flyer, hand-designed, inkjet printed. The Echo Room presents, one night only, the return of Lionel Shore. There was a date, 3 weeks out. Back home, I set the flyer on my mantel and stared at it for an hour. Then I called Naomi again. "You heard?" I asked. She chuckled. "Of course, Marty sent me the flyer before he even asked you. I'm not sure I can still do it. You don't need to be the man you were," she said. "You just need to be. Let the voice come from where you are now." That night, I rehearsed. Not into a mic, just in the living room, reading aloud. Letting the old cadence find me. The rust was there, so was the rhythm. A different tone, a slower breath, but the timbre remained. By morning, I'd chosen the first 3 songs. Track 1. Chet Baker's "I Get Along Without You Very Well." Track 2. Dinah Washington's "What a Difference a Day Makes." Track 3. A poem I'd written after Beverly passed. If I was going back on air, it wouldn't be nostalgia, it would be truth. And whether Clark ever tuned in or not, I would know this. My voice wasn't for his approval. It was for the ones still listening in the quiet. The next morning, I cleared the dust from the old Samson mic I'd kept boxed in the closet, the same one I used for over a decade at KPRT. I ran my fingers along its grill, wondering if it remembered me the way my hands remembered its weight. I set up a makeshift booth in the corner of my study, sound blankets nailed gently to the walls, a borrowed interface from Marty, and Naomi's voice guiding me through the setup via speakerphone. "Test it," she said. "Give me something soft." I leaned in, heart stumbling. "This is Lionel Shore," I whispered, "and you're not alone tonight." She paused. Still gives me chills. It had been so long since someone reacted that way. I forgot how much it meant to be heard, not just received. For days I worked on the set list, songs I once loved, words that felt like bridges back to something I hadn't finished saying. The poem I chose for the midpoint was one I wrote after Beverly's funeral, though I'd never read it aloud. It was too bare then, too full of rawness. I hadn't learned to hold gently, but now, with age wrapping my grief in quieter cloth, I knew it was ready. I didn't tell Clark. He wouldn't understand, or worse, he'd pretend to support it while texting someone under the table, half listening, half mocking. Instead, I told no one but Naomi, Marty, and Lydia, a former intern who now ran a podcast out of Brooklyn and had posted a tiny blog about my return under a pseudonym, Silver Frequencies. It got shared, not widely, not virally, but with intention. Older listeners, former DJs, a woman from Beaverton who sent me a letter that simply said, "Your voice taught me how to cry safely. I'll be tuning in." The night of the broadcast, Marty picked me up in his aging Chevy and handed me a thermos of coffee too strong and too sweet, just the way we drank it in '85. The setup was modest. His apartment, a mic, a feed routed through shortwave and streamed online to a handful of loyal insomniacs. No sponsors. No time checks, just the air, the static, and me. He gave me a nod at 7:59. "Live in 60 seconds. I breathed in, then out. The red light blinked. "This is the Echo Room," I said, voice steady. "And I'm Lionel Shore. It's been a while." I let the first notes of Chet Baker drift in, soft, longing, full of corners. When I returned to the mic, I spoke not with polish, but with presence. I told a story about rain in Portland, the kind that finds its way through every crack in your coat. I introduced Dinah Washington like an old friend arriving late, but welcome. Then I read the poem. No fanfare, no apology. Just the words, honest and slow. She left behind the kettle, still warm, and I still pour from it, as if heat remembers her better than I do. There was no applause, just silence. And then the soft ping of Marty's computer, a message from someone in Astoria. I remembered my husband's voice tonight. Thank you. I closed with Nina Simone. I signed off like I used to. Keep your dials steady and your lights low. Until next time, this is Lionel Shore, letting the night speak for itself. As the music faded, Marty turned to me. "You're back," he whispered. And for once I didn't argue. 2 days passed before Clark found out. It was Naomi who told me, half laughing over the phone. He stormed into my office like he'd just uncovered a family scandal. Asked if I knew you were parading yourself around like Portland's senior citizen DJ. I could practically hear his indignation, all bark, no breath. "He said that?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, holding to the receiver with both hands like it might steady me. "Word for word." Then he sat down and listened to the whole broadcast. Didn't say a thing after, just left. I set the phone down slowly. The joy of the broadcast still lived in me, but now something sour crept in. I wasn't surprised he'd mock it. I was surprised he listened, and even more surprised he stayed. That afternoon, Clark showed up unannounced, hands in his pockets, mouth already twisted in that defensive smirk he wore like a second skin. "You could have told me," he said. "You would have laughed." He shrugged. I did. I didn't move. "But then," he added, quieter, "I kept listening." He sat down at the table, looked at the old Samson mic still perched beside my notebook. "I didn't know you wrote poems," he said. "You didn't ask." Silence. "I think I forgot you were someone before you were my dad." I sat across from him. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but something in his voice had softened. "You always thought the show was just noise," I said. "I thought it took you away from us," he replied. "From Mom. She loved the show." "I didn't know that." We sat with that truth for a moment. He looked around, eyes landing on the reels, the flyers, the half-written playlists. "People really tuned in?" I nodded. "They still do. Small group, but real." Clark leaned back in the chair. "I played one of your poems for Shannon." My eyebrows lifted. She cried, said it reminded her of her grandfather. That landed somewhere deep in my chest. Then she asked if you were famous. I smiled. "Not anymore." "But you were, huh?" I didn't answer that, because fame was never the point. Connection was. Clark stayed longer than usual. He even offered to help me set up a simple website. Nothing fancy, just something to archive your stuff so it doesn't disappear when Marty's apartment inevitably floods again. It wasn't affection, but it was effort, and effort, at our age, is its own kind of offering. That night, I received another message through the Echo Room inbox. A man in his 60s wrote, "You said what I couldn't at my wife's funeral. Thank you for letting me borrow your voice." I replied slowly, one key at a time. "You can keep it as long as you need." Then I looked out the window. Portland at night is a strange comfort, always damp, always dim, but never without rhythm. The city still hummed. And for the first time in years, I did too. A week later, Naomi called again. "Lionel," she said, her voice bright, "OPB wants to feature you, a segment. Nothing long, just a piece on legacy voices. They want to talk about the comeback." I almost said no. Then I remembered the last song I played that night, Nina Simone, Fierce and Clear, and the silence that followed. "Tell them yes," I said, "but I'm not a comeback. I'm a continuation." The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. They sent a young producer named Ivy, 26, maybe 27, with a pressed linen blazer and a recorder smaller than my thumb. She sat up in my living room, her face politely curious, not yet impressed. "Mr. Shore," she began, "what made you return to the mic after all these years?" I thought about that for a moment. It wasn't a return, I said. It was a recovery. Like stumbling across an old scar and realizing it never healed, just thickened. She blinked, then smiled faintly. "That's poetic." I nodded. It was meant to be. She asked questions that tried to sound casual but weren't, about legacy, relevance, aging. What does it mean to have a voice again? I gave her the answer I'd rehearsed. It means I was never voiceless, just unheard. But the truth itched deeper. It meant I still had something to give. After she left, I sat in the quiet she'd disturbed. The air still held the warmth of performance, and I found myself longing for the studio again. Not just Marty's cozy pirate corner, but a real booth, real boards, real silence before the red light. The next morning my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Shore? Yes. This is David Ellis, station manager at KPRT. I caught your Echo Room show and the OPB teaser. I said nothing. I want to invite you back, he said. Not full time. Just one Sunday a month. We'd clear a slot. You'd call it whatever you like. I stood at the window, Portland's skyline blurry with drizzle. You're serious? Dead, he said. You've still got a sound we're missing, and frankly, the listeners are asking. I swallowed. A real studio, after 30 years. Let me think, I said. You've got a week, he said, but I hope you say yes. When I hung up, I just stood there, hand on the curtain, breath slow. They wanted me back, and not as a relic, as a host. Later that day I told Clark. He frowned. Isn't that a little much? Too much? I asked. I mean, aren't you tired? I looked at him carefully. No, I said. For once I'm not. He didn't push further, but his silence had edges. Is it hard for you, I asked, to see me doing something you didn't expect? He rubbed his jaw. It's just strange. I used to think your show pulled you away from us, and now everyone's applauding it like it's the second coming. It wasn't the show, I said. It was me, Clark. I pulled away, because I didn't know how to be both, a father and a voice. He looked at me then, not as a son looking for blame, but as a man trying to unbraid the knots of history. I wanted you to hear me, I added. I'm hearing you now, he said. That night I called David Ellis and said yes. He gave me my slot. Last Sunday of the month, midnight. I called it Quiet Return. Naomi helped me with the branding. Marty mailed in a crate of curated vinyl. The station gave me a boardroom mic that smelled faintly of coffee and cedar, the same scent the booth had back in '84. My first night I stood in the studio before going live, the lights dimmed, the on-air sign glowing red. And I said quietly to no one and to everyone, "This is Lionel Shore, you found me again." Then I dropped the needle, and the room, the world, the silence, all of it, leaned in. The ratings were modest, but the letters weren't. By the second show I'd received 23 handwritten notes. Some came in envelopes sealed with old stamps, others tucked into books mailed from strangers. One read simply, "You reminded me that grief isn't a mistake." Another, "My mother died to this music. You brought her back to me for an hour." I read them all, slowly, sometimes twice. Clark didn't mention the show again, but he came by more often, once with muffins, once with an old photo of Beverly from our honeymoon I hadn't seen in 40 years. "She looks young in this," I said. "She was," he said. It hung between us for a beat too long. "She used to hum to your sign-off," he added. "I remember that now." I thought it was just background, but she'd wait up for it. I didn't know that. It felt like a seed buried in old soil, finally pushing up. 2 weeks later, Marty called. "You got fans in Minnesota now," he said. "Someone streamed your whole last show over an old CB frequency. Said they wanted the truckers to hear real radio." We both laughed, but it stuck with me. Real radio. There was something sacred in that phrase, something Clark didn't yet understand. One morning I invited him to sit in during a live session. He arrived awkward, clutched a coffee too tightly, eyes darting around the booth like it might collapse. "I just sit here?" he asked. "Only rule," I said, "is you listen." He nodded. I queued up Sarah Vaughan, then leaned into the mic. "This next one's for someone learning how to listen again. Maybe you are, too." He didn't react, not right away. But when the song ended, his knee stopped bouncing. Later, as we packed up, he asked, "Is that what it felt like all those years? Talking to no one and everyone?" "Yes," I said. "It's how I made peace with the world. Even when I couldn't make peace at home." He looked away. Was I that hard to race? I studied him. No. But I was too in love with my own voice to hear yours. He blinked hard, then nodded. And that was our moment. Not cinematic, not tearful, but real. The following Sunday, Naomi joined me in the booth. She didn't sit behind the glass. She brought a chair into the room and read poetry between tracks. Her voice cracked once, during a line about winter light and the smell of oranges. And I reached over, rested my hand on hers. We didn't say anything more. It was understood. That night I left the studio and found Clark waiting outside. He wasn't there for a ride. He just stood, hands in pockets, face unreadable. I listened, he said. I know, I replied. I get it now. There was wind in the trees, headlights curving past on the road. I used to think your silence at home meant disinterest, he continued. But I think now, maybe you'd just spent all your words. I exhaled slowly. And maybe, I said, I saved the wrong ones. He stepped forward then, not to hug, not to shake hands, but to stand beside me. We watched the cars pass, and for once, the silence between us didn't ache. It listened. 3 Sundays in, something shifted. Not just in me, in the rhythm of the hours, the feel of the air. It was as if the act of speaking into the night had rewired my senses. Food tasted fuller. Music settled deeper into my chest. I walked more. I lingered in bookstores. One afternoon I wandered into a vinyl shop near Hawthorne, a little corner place with cracked floors and handwritten labels. The clerk, a woman maybe 40, paused mid-conversation with a customer to point at me. "You're the guy from the Echo Room," she said. I laughed. "Depends on the night," she smiled. "We play your shows through the ceiling speakers every Monday. It slows people down, makes them stay longer." I nodded, touched in a way I didn't know how to name. Later that day I bought a new chair, leather, curved, high-backed like the one I used to sit in at the old station. I placed it by the window. Morning sun hit just right there, and for the first time in years, I read without distraction. Old poetry mostly, some Stein, some Gwendolyn Brooks. Even tried my hand at writing again. Short pieces, untidy lines. But honest, Clark noticed. "You're happier," he said one evening while fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. I looked up from my notebook. "I think I am." He smiled, real, not polite. "Good. Took long enough." A week later, Naomi brought over a small microphone for home use. Sleek, modern, fit in the palm like a stone. "In case the studio ever feels far," she said. It was a quiet gift, the kind that says, "Keep going, but only if you want." I recorded a few entries that week, soft things, thoughts on shadows and jazz, stories I hadn't told in years. One, about a time Beverly and I got caught in a thunderstorm and danced under a freeway overpass while strangers honked and cheered. I played it back and didn't flinch at my voice. That was new. Then came a letter, typed on an old machine, uneven spacing. "Mr. Shore. I don't know what you've done to me. I'm 66, a retired welder, and I've cried 3 Sundays in a row. My wife says I'm softer now. She thanks you. So do I." It was signed Marty Gold. Not from Marty, but about him. He'd written it himself and sent it to me like a listener would. I called him immediately. "You're a fool," I said. He laughed. "A grateful one. We made plans to meet." The next Sunday, he showed up with a folder, sketches for a potential live event. "You think they'd come?" I asked, flipping through. He shrugged. "Does it matter?" It didn't, but still I wanted them to. That night I opened the show with a dedication. To those who think they've passed their prime, this is your hour, your voice, your breath in the dark. You're not gone. You're just quieter now. Let's turn you up. I played Ella Fitzgerald, then read a listener's letter aloud. The studio, once a place of performance, had become something else, a room of return, a place where I wasn't proving anything, just being. At the end of the hour, I let the silence hang a little longer than usual, no sign-off, just one last track. Thelonious Monk and me, watching the light dim from the on-air sign. Peaceful, not finished, but finally, undeniably, free. There was something about that silence at the end of Monk's track that stayed with me longer than the music. It followed me into the parking lot, slipped into my coat like fog, and curled around my thoughts as I drove home. I didn't need applause. I needed stillness. And now, for the first time in decades, I knew how to live inside it. The days between shows became less about waiting and more about noticing. Small things took up space, the sound of the kettle boiling, the way sunlight settled differently across my living room now that the chair by the window had a place in it. I took to sitting there every morning, no schedule, no purpose, just the company of coffee, books, and the occasional jay fluttering outside the screen. One morning Naomi stopped by with a box under her arm. "You're getting fan mail," she said, setting it down like an offering. I lifted the lid. Letters. Photographs. One woman had sent a cassette with her late husband's voice on it, a short clip from 1987 calling into my old show. I remembered him. He used to end every call with, "Keep your head in the clouds, Lionel, it's clearer up there." I played the tape. His voice cracked halfway through. So did mine. Naomi stayed for tea. We didn't talk about the radio. We didn't need to. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever think about dating again?" I nearly spilled my drink. She laughed. "That's a yes." "It's not a no," I muttered. There was a long pause. "I think," she said gently, "you've built something beautiful, and I think you're still building. Doesn't mean there isn't room for someone else in the blueprint." I didn't answer, but I didn't dismiss it either. Later that week I ran into Lydia, the former intern, now podcaster, who'd first whispered my name back into the digital ether. She hugged me tightly, then stepped back with glassy eyes. "Your second show," she said, "the one with the Billie Holiday track? I played that for my dad in hospice." He smiled for the first time in weeks. I touched her shoulder. "He passed?" 3 days later," she said, "but he left listening." We stood on the sidewalk like that for a long while. She gave me a small notebook bound in leather. "Write again," she said, "but not for the mic." "For you?" I did. The next morning I wrote a poem, just 4 lines, but honest. I lived a voice. I lost a sound, but here I am, still turning round. Not perfect, but mine. Clark came by that Sunday. He didn't mention the show. Instead, he handed me a potted plant. "Aloe," he said. "Low maintenance, like you now." I laughed. We sat on the porch. No talk of childhood, no apologies. But he leaned back and said, "You're different." "I feel different," I said. He sipped his drink. "I like it." The wind picked up, rustling the trees just enough to make the silence musical. And I realized my world wasn't smaller now. It was clearer. Each note had space. Each breath had room. I hadn't recovered the past. I'd begun to live beyond it. That night, I ended the show not with music, but with words. "Wherever you are," I said into the mic, "breathe in. You made it here. That's enough for tonight." And then I let the air stay empty, a full, generous silence, the kind that listens back. The next morning, Clark called. "I think you should meet someone," he said, without preamble. I paused, still barefoot in the kitchen, halfway through buttering a piece of toast. "Someone?" "My daughter." "Riley. She's been asking questions about your show, wants to know why people send you letters and cry over jazz." "She's 10. "Exactly," he said. "I think she's ready to hear you in a different way." I hesitated. I hadn't seen Riley in months, not since the funeral, when she'd clung to her mother's coat and refused to look at anyone. Clark added, "She's been recording herself lately on this old tape deck I gave her, making fake interviews. I think she got the bug." That Sunday, they came together. Riley wore purple corduroy overalls and a T-shirt with cartoon microphones printed across it. She looked up at me like she was studying something rare. "You don't look like a voice," she said. "And what does a voice look like?" I asked. "Thinner," she replied. "More echoey." Clark laughed. I didn't. She followed me to the booth with an intensity that made me nervous. I wasn't used to being watched with admiration. Inside, I let her sit at the extra mic, the one Naomi sometimes used. "This is real," she whispered. "As real as it gets." She reached for a knob, then looked at me for permission. I nodded. She turned it, Not even the right one, but that wasn't the point. Want to do the sign-on? I asked. Her eyes widened. I don't know how. Just say what you feel. That's all a show is, one truth at a time. She cleared her throat. Leaned in. This is Riley, she said. We're here. I don't know why, but it's nice. I smiled. She pulled back. Did I ruin it? Not at all, I said. You just made it better. We played 2 songs, a Miles Davis track, then a lullaby cover by Norah Jones. She swayed slightly in her seat. Afterwards, she asked, Do you ever get scared no one's listening? Sometimes, I said. But even if it's just one person, that even if it's just me, that's enough. She sat quietly for a moment, then she reached for her backpack and pulled out a small recorder. Can I ask you something for my fake show? I nodded. She clicked it on. What's the bravest thing you ever said on air? I thought, then answered. Good night. She blinked. That's not brave. It is, I said, because it means letting go. After the show, we all had dinner. Riley insisted we play records during dessert. She chose Billie Holiday. She's sad, she said, licking whipped cream from her spoon. She's honest, I replied. Clark watched us quietly. When Riley went to wash up, he said, Thank you for showing her this side of you and for letting her see it before I ever did. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. He looked around my apartment, then back at me. You ever think about doing more? More? Yeah, books, workshops, teaching maybe. You've got something people want. I didn't answer right away. But that night I pulled out the leather notebook Lydia gave me, and I wrote a title across the first real page, Lessons from the Static. Then I added a dedication for the ones who listened too late and the ones just learning how. I closed it gently and let the silence stay. But silence doesn't last long when someone else wants to fill it. 3 days later, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was clipped, familiar, too rehearsed. Lionel, it's Georgia, Clark's ex-wife. We hadn't spoken since the funeral. Even then it was no more than a handshake and averted eyes. I heard Riley was on your show. I stayed quiet. She came home talking about microphones and jazz and something called Truth Radio. Her tone was caught between confusion and judgment. I let the pause stretch long enough to make her uncomfortable. She was brilliant, I said finally. You should be proud. I am, she replied, but it landed hollow. It's just, you were never this open with Clark. Not like that. The line stung. Not because it wasn't true, but because she didn't know how hard I had tried in my own flawed way. I'm different now, I said. Older, maybe softer. She sighed. Clark says you're planning something, a book, more airtime. I bristled. That's for me to decide. There it was. The old edge in my voice, sharp from being dulled too long, she caught it. I'm just saying, she continued, be careful. Riley's young, impressionable. This isn't just about radio waves anymore. It's about family, too. I swallowed that quietly. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. No music, no pen in hand. Just the echo of a woman still trying to shape my narrative with her concern. Clark called that evening. She reached out, didn't she? She did. I'm sorry, I didn't ask her to. I know, he paused. She's scared. You matter again, and she doesn't know what that means yet. I almost laughed. You don't owe me defense, I said. Just honesty. You're not planning anything reckless, are you? No, I said. But I am planning. That Sunday, Naomi came by before the show. I heard whispers, she said with a sly grin. About a lecture series? A mentorship program? I raised an eyebrow. From who? Marty. Who else? He's halfway through building a syllabus for you. I chuckled, but the idea stuck. Later that night, I recorded a segment off-air. Sometimes, I said into the mic, when people start hearing you again, they try to steer your voice. Not always with malice, sometimes with fear, sometimes with love that's gone stale. But the lesson's the same. Keep your hand on the dial. I didn't air it, not yet, but I saved it. I titled the file, Interference. The next morning a letter arrived, handwritten, from Riley. Inside she'd drawn a picture of 2 microphones connected by a ribbon below it in scrawled print. "Thank you for letting me talk." I heard myself for the first time. I pressed the paper to my chest. That night, I knew what I had to say. On air? I waited until the last 10 minutes. Then I leaned into the mic. "This is for the ones who think it's too late to begin, and for those who think letting someone speak means losing control. Let them speak. You might hear yourself in their voice." I played Nina Simone, soft and slow, and watched the red glow fade from the on-air sign, still warm, still mine. The next day brought rain, thick, stubborn sheets that made the city feel underwater. I watched it fall from my kitchen window, fingers wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps. Familiar, intentional. Georgia. She stood in the hallway like a shadow I hadn't invited. Her coat clung to her, soaked through, but she didn't seem to care. "I won't stay long," she said. I stepped aside, not out of warmth, out of habit. She didn't sit, just hovered near the bookshelf, eyes scanning titles she used to roll her eyes at. "I listened to your last show," she began. I waited. "You said some things about control, about voice." I nodded. "You were talking about me." "I was talking about all of us," I said. "Anyone who's ever tried to protect something by caging it." She turned then. Her face was worn, her makeup half washed by the rain. "I was scared," she said quietly, "of Riley loving you more, of losing the little space I still have in her world." "You won't," I said. "But you'll lose her if you try to shrink her curiosity." Georgia's lips tightened. "You're rewriting yourself," she said, "and I'm not in the draft." That one hit harder than I expected. "I'm not erasing anyone," I said. "I'm just finally writing truthfully." She stepped closer. "Then tell me this. If Riley wants to be like you, will you teach her to forget people too? Will you teach her silence like you taught Clark?" The air in the room thinned. "No," I said firmly. "I'll teach her to speak, even when it's hard, even when the room isn't ready for it." Georgia looked down. Her hands trembled slightly. "She's 10. She needs anchors, not microphones." "She needs both," I said, "and she'll choose which to lean on. That's not up to us." We stood there for a moment, not enemies, not allies, just 2 people with different versions of what family should have been. "I came here to ask you to step back," she admitted. "And now?" I asked. "I think I came to understand why I can't ask that anymore." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Clark's not the only one who hurt," she said. "You left too." "I know." She didn't wait for anything more. That evening I opened the mic with a quiet breath. "No music tonight, just this. Forgiveness isn't a performance. It's a decision we make when the silence gets too heavy. Tonight, I'm choosing to speak instead." I told a story about a jazz musician who lost his hearing late in life but still performed by feel, memorizing every note of every piece and trusting the band to hold him. "Sometimes," I said, "we play anyway, even if we can't hear what comes back." The messages poured in. One said, "I think I forgave my brother tonight." Another, "Thank you for reminding me that choosing peace isn't weakness." And then, at the very end, a message from Clark. "Dad." That was brave. I read it twice. Then I turned off the mic. No music, no final words. Just the hum of the booth, my breath, my choice. I didn't expect the aftermath to feel so light, but it did. The studio air didn't press in the way it used to. The weight I'd carried of silence, of guilt, of old roles never played well, began to dissolve like fog in morning sun, and people noticed. Marty invited me out to a community cafe downtown, the kind with chalkboard menus and mismatched chairs. "I booked you for something," he said, sliding over a flyer. "Local legends, Portland storytellers live. You're on the panel next Friday. They're expecting something raw." "I'm 77, Marty. Everything I say is raw now." He chuckled. "They're excited, especially the woman who organized it. She's your age, used to teach speech at PSU. Listened to your old show with her husband before he passed. She asked if you were as kind in person as you are on air. I paused. And what did you tell her? That you're louder in real life. We both laughed. Friday came. The event was held in a church-turned theater. Small stage, warm lights, chairs packed in tight. Naomi waved from the front row, Riley beside her, legs swinging. When I stepped up, the applause startled me. Not its volume, its warmth. I didn't speak immediately. I scanned the crowd, took in the variety of faces, young, old, unsure, familiar. Then I began. I used to think my voice had a shelf life, that the only things worth saying came when you were young and certain. But age strips you down. And what's left? That's your real sound. That's the note you carry when there's no music behind you. The room stilled. I told stories I hadn't told before, about Beverly, about Clark as a boy, about the moment I realized my own silence had shaped more lives than my words ever could. People leaned in, not for drama, but because they understood what it meant to regret gently. Afterward, a woman approached me. Short silver curls, wide eyes. She introduced herself as Lila. You said something that cracked me open, she said. That part about real sound. I think I've been humming a false tune for decades. I smiled. Then I hope tonight helps you change the station. She smiled back. You ever need a harmony? I'm available Thursdays and every other weekend. Her boldness warmed me. It had been years since anyone flirted with something more than politeness. The next Thursday, we had coffee. She was smart, quick to laugh, sharper than I'd anticipated, and easy. Easy in the way company should be when it doesn't demand proof. We walked the waterfront after, talked about everything except age. At one point she asked, "What do you miss most?" I thought for a while, then answered, "Not being known, but being understood anyway." She nodded. That's rare. The next show, I told the audience, we age not into quiet, but into clarity, and clarity is where all the real voices begin. Afterward, Naomi stayed behind. That was your best one, she said. What made it different? You weren't trying to be remembered. You were just being real. I looked at the mic, now silent, and felt something shift again. Maybe it wasn't about return anymore. Maybe it was about reaching. Marty called that night. The theater wants you back. Regular storytelling series. You in? I thought of Lila, of Riley, of Clark, slowly watching me become something new. I'm in, I said. Then for no one but myself, I whispered into the dark room, I'm here. And slowly, my world reshaped itself around that truth. I started keeping the front window open, just a few inches, enough for the hum of life outside to drift in, dogs barking, the click of heels on pavement, the groan of the streetcar cables, ordinary noise that had once annoyed me, now part of a new rhythm I didn't want to mute. The apartment began to change too, not drastically, but with purpose. The armchair by the window was reupholstered, a rich navy now, with a throw pillow Riley picked out that said, On Air, in bold red stitching. The bookshelf grew heavier with letters, clippings, notes from listeners who found themselves again between the lines of my stories. Leila brought over a fern she named Walt. He sat on the sill like a quiet witness to it all. Then one morning, I knew. I was ready to leave. Not the life I had, but the space that had been built inside loss. That apartment was my cocoon. It had wrapped me in grief, in growth, in rediscovery. But now, I needed something more, something earned, a home, not inherited, not shared, chosen. With Marty's help, I found it, a cottage on the east edge of Portland, tucked just off a side street with a modest garden and an old oak that leaned like it had stories too. When I walked through it for the first time, I touched every surface like a blind man learning a language. The kitchen had a narrow window above the sink. I imagined Riley helping me bake banana bread there. The study had warm acoustics. I clapped once and the sound folded back like a handshake. And the bedroom, it faced the sunrise. That sealed it. I sold the apartment quietly. Didn't even tell Naomi until everything was signed. She cried, then helped me pack. You know this isn't the end, she said, folding a tattered notebook into a box. I know, I said. It's the first space I'll grow into on purpose. Clark came on moving day. He carried boxes without complaint, even labeled them in careful print. Books, tapes, Riley's pics. When we unloaded the last of it, he lingered in the doorway. Looks like you finally got your own broadcast tower, he said, nodding toward the sloped roof and weathered shingles. I did, I smiled, and the signal's strong. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of noise, because of the stillness. It was the first time in decades I'd gone to bed somewhere that felt entirely, undeniably mine. The silence didn't frighten me anymore. It felt earned, like applause from the universe. The next morning, I brewed coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and sat in a chair Clark helped assemble. I watched the sun rise over my new home. No music, no microphone, just me. Present, unscripted, and whole. Later that afternoon, I recorded the first episode from the cottage. I called it The Sound of Arrival. Some voices, I said into the mic, don't need a city behind them. Just a quiet place where the soul fits the walls. I let the jazz roll in, something simple, brushed drums and bass, and I smiled. Not for the listeners, but for myself. Because at last I wasn't waiting to be heard. I was home. That word used to feel fragile. Home. As if it could only exist if someone else built it for you. But standing in my own doorway, mug in hand, slippers soft on wooden planks I had chosen, I realized something truer. Home isn't a place. It's a state of forgiveness. I forgave myself for the years I was gone, not just from Clark's life, but from my own. I forgave the quiet cowardice that had kept me passive, the long stretches of resignation I'd mistaken for maturity. And slowly, I let go of needing Clark's forgiveness in return. It arrived anyway, not with a speech, not even with words, but with presence. He came by every Sunday now, not to fix anything, not out of duty, just to sit. Some Sundays we spoke, some we didn't. Riley joined once every few weeks, always with a new question. What does resonance mean in sound, or did you ever forget your lines live? She liked to lie on the rug with my old headphones, listening to tapes of my early shows. I never told her I wasn't proud of those years, the performance, the polish, the voice that didn't quite match the man. But she listened with joy, not scrutiny, and that was enough. Naomi launched a podcast based on the segments we'd recorded over the year. She called it Echo Father. I teased her about the title. She smirked and said, "You earned it." Fan letters kept coming. From people in hospice, from truckers who played me overnight, from a woman in Maine who said my voice got her through chemo. But the one that stopped me came on cream-colored stationery. Dear Mr. Shore, my father was never able to say the things I needed. But when I listen to you, I imagine how it might have felt if he had. Thank you for teaching me how to imagine better. It was signed with a single initial. I kept it taped above my writing desk. Lila and I walked often now, slow evening strolls through the neighborhood, our hands brushing but never clinging. She didn't try to fill my silences. I didn't try to rescue hers. Sometimes we just nodded toward a bird or a porch light or a particularly red maple leaf and said nothing at all. On the anniversary of my first broadcast back on air, the studio held a small event. Not for ratings, for closure. Marty gave a toast. Naomi read a line from a poem I once quoted. Clark shook my hand like a man greeting a peer, not a father. Riley hugged me tight enough to steal a breath. Then I stood, cleared my throat, and simply said, I used to chase volume. Now I follow meaning. That night, back at the cottage, I poured myself a modest drink, sat on the porch, and played my last recorded segment on a portable speaker. I didn't critique it, didn't judge my tone, my rhythm, the way I closed. I just let it wash over me. A life. Unfolding, with pauses, with returns, with grace. And when it ended, when the last note faded, I whispered, "That's enough. Not from lack, from fullness." I leaned back, watched the sky dim over the roof I'd chosen, and let it hold me.